to be creating Windows applications rather than console applications. Windows applications make use of something called a form. The form is blank at first. You then add control to your form, things like buttons, text boxes, menus, checkboxes, radio buttons, etc. To get your first look at a Windows form, do the following. The Properties node represents configuration settings that apply to your entire project and are stored in the .xproj file in your solution folder. These settings include compilation options, security and deployment settings, and much more. You make modifications to your project using the Project Designer, which is a set of property pages that you access by right-clicking Properties and selecting Open. In the context of a project, a reference simply identifies a binary file that your application requires in order to run. Typically, a reference identifies a DLL file such as one of the .NET Framework class library files. It can also reference a .NET assembly, called a shim, that enables your application to call methods on a COM object or native Win32 DLL. If your program creates an instance of a class that is defined in some other assembly, then you must add a reference to that file in your project before you compile your project. To add a reference, click Add Reference on the Project menu. All C# projects by default include a reference to mscorelib.dll, which contains the core.NET Framework classes. You can add references to additional .NET Framework DLLs and other files by clicking the Project menu and selecting Add Reference. A resource is data that is included with your application, but it can be stored in such a way that it can be modified independently from the other source code. For example, you can store all your strings as resources rather than hard-coding them into the source code. You can then translate the strings into different languages at some later date and add them to the application folder that you ship to customers without having to recompile your assembly. The 5 types of resources defined by Visual C# are strings, images, icons, audio, and files. You add, remove, or edit resources using the Resource Designer, which is accessed on the Resources tab in the Project Designer. When you create a Windows Forms project, Visual C# adds one form to the project by default and calls it Form 1. The 2 files that represent the form are called form1.cs and form1.designer.cs. You write your code in form1.cs. The designer.cs file is where the Windows Forms Designer writes the code that implements all the actions that you performed by dragging and dropping controls from the toolbox. You can add a new form by clicking the Project menu item and selecting Add Windows Form. Each form has 2 files associated with it. Form1.cs, or whatever you might name it, contains the source code that you write to configure the form and its controls, such as list boxes and text boxes, and responds to events such as button clicks and keystrokes. In simple Windows Forms projects, you do most or all of your coding in this file. The designer.cs file contains the source code that the Forms Designer writes when you drag controls onto the form, set properties in the Properties window, and so on. Typically, you should not edit this file manually at all. The main method is the entry point for your program. The code between the curly brackets of main will get executed when the program first starts. The last line in the Windows Application 1 code above is the one that runs Form 1 when the application starts. You can do other things here. For example, suppose you had a program that connects to a server. If it finds a connection, then it loads some information from a database. In the main method, you could check that the server connection is okay. If it is not, display a second form. If it is okay, then display the first form.